What is going on, Comic Fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by comic writer Alisa Kwitney. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited. You have been involved in comics a lot, being an editor, being a writer. You're a novelist, you graphic novels, you have comic books. And I want to talk to you about just all things comics. But before we hop into your new project, HOWL, which is fantastic, by the way, which you all need to pick up from Ahoy, have you always liked comics? Like, how did you kind of get involved with comics, or did that kind of come later in life?
No, it was very early in life. So I want to say that when I grew up, comics were still available in candy shops. There was those rotating racks.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of girls read comics in those days because it wasn't some specialty thing that you had to go and search out. Also, we just didn't have as much to do. So comic books were everyone I knew loved them. And girls tended to love either Archie and those kind of comics or Casper, Richie Rich, or like me, they loved horror. And those were sort of my very favorite comics to begin with were the horror anthologies.
Okay.
But if it was a comic, I would read it. I would absolutely read it. It didn't matter what it was. It was Classics Illustrated. I'd read it. If it was, some obscure legion of superheroes, I kind of love the obscure legion of superheroes. Some stuff I think I even read, Sergeant Fury. If it was a comic, I adored it. And my grandparents, who were Hebrew teachers, told me what other people have been told about a different pastime. They told me it would destroy my vision.
And here you are. We can we can see you fine. You can see us, and you.
No. I have a retinal specialist. Maybe this was the thing. I think it was the inbreeding of my, you go back some generations in little shtetls, and there was some cousin marriage, I think. But
Well, you that's so cool to hear. I always like to hear kind of people's origin stories of like how do they get into the thing. Where was it at a point for you though that you decided I want to, get involved in creating comics?
that is such a good question. So first of all, I didn't stop reading comic books. I'll just sort of most of the people I knew, girls stopped before boys, and everyone stopped at a certain point. And I kept going. I think at one point I was living abroad and somebody gave me post-college a subscription to Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
I was getting that abroad. I was in college when I discovered the X-Men, which had been going on for a little while, but I discovered Chris Claremont's X-Men and the New Mutants. So I just was continuing. And when I
Yeah.
applied to graduate school, I went to Columbia's MFA program. I had been out of college a few years. I'd been working as a really, I don't know what the word is. If I say journalist or newspaper reporter, you get a certain image,
Yeah.
but there used to be these weekly newspapers, and they were this was I think the Jewish Floridian and the Miami Jewish Tribune. So these were really small papers.
Yeah.
I was out of that. I was going to Columbia's program, and they asked us to all introduce ourselves. And in a spirit of rebellion, I wrote that I was an incredible fan of romance novels and comic books. Now, I just want to say this is before comic books had widespread
Yeah.
cachet. So I made some friends there, that I've retained who thought this was a great thing, and learned actually that was how someone turned me on to what DC was doing currently, the Killing Joke and some of the Alan Moore stuff, because I had been a little out of the loop. Anyway, so you finish your MFA and you think, how am I going to earn a living? My friends all seem to have real jobs. So the thing that you do is you apply for jobs, usually in tradition. This is how it was in the 90s. You would
Yeah.
apply to be someone's assistant in a literary publishing place. But I decided to also apply to romance publishers in New York. There was only one, Silhouette, at the time, and also to Marvel and DC Comics, just because I thought, well, I want to be writing.
Yeah.
Let this be fun, you
Yeah.
know? And I've always felt about genre the way I felt I was supposed to feel about literary fiction. I felt all my heat and passion for genre. Marvel didn't call me back. Silhouette brought me into an interview and initially said I was overqualified and they would not offer me a job. They changed their mind, but it was too late because DC said, "Come on in for an interview." And um, and I went in and I have to say that I said things you're not supposed to say. So they said, "Do you want to edit?" I said, "Yeah, but I also want to write." And I think in this current climate, certainly at the big companies, I think that they have a real separation of church and state.
Yeah.
But in those days, Dick Giordano, who was then vice president, was interviewing me. And he was moonlighting as an inker. At one point, he worked as an inker, and I was giving him editing notes, and he was the vice president of the company. So when I told them that I wanted to write as well as edit it, everyone was like, "Yeah, that's awesome. You just come on and do that."
That's fantastic. And so then, like, so you got a little bit of editing and then, getting your foot in the door with them with writing. How much of, being an editor at DC kind of helped shape who you are as a comic writer?
I mean, so very, very much because one of the first things I got to do was read scripts
Mm.
and see artwork coming in. So it was a real apprenticeship. Nobody's asked me that question. I've had been on a lot of podcasts and no one
Really?
has asked me exactly how that shaped me. And it's such a good question because by reading a lot of scripts and seeing how different writers would describe things and call for things and how artists responded, that was a really good lesson. Alan Moore was incredibly visual. I believe he's one of the writers I never actually met, and I think he was quite a decent artist in his own right. So he would write these very lengthy descriptions, and it was a real do not try this at home.
Mm.
Garth Ennis, by contrast, who was only 22 and he started writing for us, which was, I think I was 25 when I started out. So he was even younger than I was. And his scripts were so spare. It was just, they were haikus. And Neil Gaiman did something that I hadn't seen other people do as much, where he would start out with a sort of letter to the artist.
Mm.
And he would say things like, "Well, I'm sitting here and I'm having my tea, and this is in the background on the," and he would tell the artist things like, "I'm thinking about this kind of a thing that would help inform the drawing,
Mm.
even though you wouldn't see it directly." And I mean, all of these things you can write too sparsely. You can over direct an artist. You can include too many details about what's on the TV in the background. But I began to learn from this. And then when I started writing my own scripts, I had really good artists. Guy Davis was the first artist who drew something of mine, I believe. And I often say it's easiest when both of you aren't virgins. So I was virgin to this form, and I would look and see where Guy had gone a different
Mm.
road from me. Now, some artists will do something different because it's easier to do a close up than to do a long range shot, or they didn't want to bother with the. But in Guy's case, every decision he made on My Phantom Stranger was towards story and towards superior storytelling. So I kind of sat there and took notes on every place he hadn't listened to me and what I needed to learn from that.
Yeah. That's so cool to see. Like like you said, you kind of figured out how you wanted to develop yourself as a writer, and and writing your scripts for comics. I want to jump a little bit into because I've had you on for a little bit, and I want to really dig into your new comic series from Ahoy Comics called How. Talk to me about that. What is it about if someone hasn't gotten to pick up? Because at the time of recording, issue one has already come out, and issue two is about to just drop. So, what is it if people haven't gotten to hear it about it yet?
So the first I've learned as a writer to do it as a journalist. Like, here's my line: if you have no patience, it's Mrs. Maisel meets Invasion of the Body Snatchers. If I still have your interest after that, I will say it's set in Greenwich Village, and it is set in 1959, and it is based on real events on the one hand. It's my parents were, my father was Robert Sheckley, the science fiction writer, and my mother's Eva Kwitney, who became a journalist and a therapist. And so it's their early years in their 20s living together. My father was part of Hydra, which was the science fiction writers club and I rename it Scylla because I didn't want to have the confusion with another group called Hydra that people may be aware
Yeah.
of. And so it's a little bit about the forces that were shaping the world in that time, which was, you have this amazing moment in science fiction where science fiction is becoming much more sociological
Mm.
and satirical. Uh, and at the same time, it had this massive blind spot in terms of women, because I grew up reading these stories and loving them, and yet feeling, the aliens all seem male and more, more like people than the human females who seem kind of thin and barely fleshed out. So I wanted to write about that, but I also really wanted to write about odd people.
Yes. Oh, good. So you bring a lot of inspiration from, like you said, of your parents, of kind of their story. How do you weave that into, creating something original though, while paying homage to kind of like, real life stuff while also the, science fiction element of it?
Oh, again, you ask good questions. I think it helps to sort of know what's at the root of the writing for you. And
Mm.
for me, it was about a relationship. So it was very much about my mother's relationship with my father. It's about the ways in which you can rebel against your parents and then end up, getting caught in, I think the Ziva in this story, the young woman has felt overshadowed by her mother, who's got a really powerful personality and really wants to go and forge her own identity,
Mm.
but ends up in a relationship where she is subsuming herself into this relationship. And because they're bohemian and because he's intellectual, she thinks that she's doing something very different and she's losing herself. And so knowing that that was at the core of it for me allowed me to have so much fun with the fact that, Bert, the husband, becomes infected with alien spores and begins to, have this alien consciousness, uh, which and is being influenced by Myrtle Morell, a therapist who is actually the alien queen and masterminding this takeover of the earth.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And what I love is, after reading the first two issues of, getting to see the dynamic of, like you said, your main character of her relationship with her mother, right? The tension that's there, but also then, like you said, the relationships with, her coworkers, her peers, her husband. And I think you have the root of your story is developing this character, and then you get to just set it in a wonderful setting of Greenwich Village with pod people.
Well, so I approach genre the way I think, academics, well, nowadays a lot of people approach genre this way, but I think about it a lot. And so if I start to get into a state where I want to watch all the pod people stuff again, a little, Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Village of the Damned, all the idea of, people who look like the people but are not. Uh, Actually, the return of Martin Gare also got into this mix, not to mention The Thing and Starman. And I'm thinking, why am I being pulled into this?
Mm.
What is it? And I realized that in different ways, I've been wrestling with this idea that sometimes the people we know or think we know start to behave and show thinking that feels very alien to how we knew them or who we thought they were.
Yeah.
And, some of this has to do with my mom's experience with dementia, and some of this has to do with the political moment we're in.
Yeah. What is it about? I know like you gravitate towards science fiction, you said because of how growing up, but what is it about science fiction as a vehicle for storytelling that makes it just such a compelling vehicle to tell a story in?
Well, first of all, I should define the kind of science fiction that I'm drawn to writing,
Yeah.
although I can enjoy a nice Andy Weir, Martian as much as the next person. Um, but I used to say I like my fantasy hard and my science fiction soft. And I like the books that blur it a little.
Mm,
So, a lot of times when people say science fiction, they're thinking space opera. They're thinking, we're going to go out into, explore new worlds. I was in my day, it was you were Star Trek or Star Wars, OG Star Trek, and I was Star Trek. Um, but I think science fiction had this other side, and it was
mm,
very, very sociological. And so it would, um, take our moment in the culture and kind of do an extrapolation of, well, if this is how it is now, what would it be like carried to its most absurd extreme? Those were a lot of the kind of short stories my father wrote,
mm,
and it really resonated with me. And my father actually was not around for most of my childhood, but his stories, they were so accessible.
mm,
And at times they would make fun of consumerism. At times they would make fun of conformity. They would talk about how, you would long to go to some exotic place and travel, but you would always end up then being in the exotic place and having this deep longing for home.
mm.
So the essential truth is you will never be happy. And I loved how you could see it differently in this different form. To say something completely strange, Heston Blumenthal is this famous chef, and he's known for, creating, eggs that were actually made of foam and bacon flavored ice cream. And I think the thing about what he did was by transforming things, he made you come at them very differently. And
Mm.
suddenly he turned the familiar unfamiliar and made you experience it differently.
Yeah. Love that. So cool. So when you had this idea for how that you wanted to tell, how did you kind of craft it and bring it out to, because you're working with Ahoy. This is your second book, I believe, with Ahoy, because you had Guilt was it also at Ahoy. Uh, how did you get connected with Ahoy?
Oh, well, I used to share an office with the editor-in-chief. Tom Pyre and I were the two smokers. And I think at one point, this is back when you could smoke indoors, and by accident, they had um, put the air conditioning in our office as though it were a computer room. So we had major ventilation. And I just love Tom. Tom is brilliant and subtle and deceptively relaxed. He's kind of got a Big Lebowski energy to him, where he seems just like he's not doing anything that requires effort, but everything he does is just so. So I had known Tom for years. He had taught me a lot of what I know about comics, and I think when he first launched Ahoy, he said it was going to be Vertigo, but with humor. I think it was, I don't know if I was supposed to say that out loud, but that was the original mandate. And I thought, oh, Vertigo with humor is, everything to me. I feel humor is my caffeine. It is my, you know, fuel. It is, I think when you lose your sense of humor
Mhm.
about something, which is what is happening, I think very much right now with everyone I know, um, you've lost your ability to shift frames and understand it.
Yeah. Does writing humor, is that, do you find that more difficult to write, or is it easier for you? Because I know humor is so subjective, like as a creator, how do you approach that then?
Oh, interesting. I think it comes somewhat naturally to me
Mhm.
in prose. I think the two most commercial things I learned about myself in prose is I can write funny and I can write sexy. And that was helpful because I actually suck at plot, as has been pointed out to me and occasionally. Um, Writing comedy in comics requires a real pas de deux with the artist. And
Mhm.
so for me, Maurice, which is spelled Morissette for those of us who have forgotten our high school French. His real name is Alain. He and I were originally matched for Mystic U, an original form of Mystic U, which was a DC comic book that didn't happen in its original form. And when it did come out, it came out with Mike Norton, also a wonderful artist. And by the way, Mystic U is now being republished in a YA format coming out, I think, March 11th.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
nice. That's a nice thing
Yeah.
to have. But Alan and I never stopped talking. We were, paired up at a time when DC was in a bit of disarray because people's lives were upended. They were moving from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Mm.
And we just continued talking for years. Then we started to do little things. I think one of the first things we did for Ahoy was a short Edgar Allan Poe story.
Oh, in the Snifter of Terror series?
Yeah, so
Yes.
our particular mandate was to do Edgar Allan Poe only, Poeier. And the story I picked was Berenice,
Oh.
which is just a great, for anyone who's ever had any tooth anxiety, this is your personal nightmare. And so we began to figure out all the things we could do. Since this was about teeth and anxiety, the guy in Berenice is in love with this woman and he keeps extracting her teeth, um, which unnecessarily. And I wanted to have teeth everywhere as a motif. I was thinking about all of, this is where my childhood joy with all those anthology horrors. I just kept thinking, I want teeth. I want Bernie Wrightson goo, and
Yeah.
and I wanted to. I did have one moment where my imagination stalled. I was having a dinner with Mark Russell and his wife. And I said, I really have this. Can I say the V word of female anatomy here?
Yep.
I said, I really want to have a vagina dentata moment, but I obviously can't show that. And I just, he said, well, of course, you just show the effects of it. And so I have this scene where, the heroine is climbing off a bicycle and, the seat is all chewed up. And anyway, there's teeth everywhere with that. I,
Mhm.
I have to say, Mark Russell is just a genius.
Yes.
Um, and anyway, so Alana and I began to really hit our stride. And he and I, the more we work together, the more we understand each other. He really likes to add panels. It is the weirdest thing. There is not an artist alive who says to himself, "You've given me 5 panels, but I'd like to have 8."
I want to draw more.
I want to draw more in tiny panels and, give myself a lot more work. And so when he does that, I sometimes have to shift things as well. And we will talk. So our rule for getting along is story first
Mm.
and humor first. If the humorous punch is part of it, we also have scenes which are supposed to be dramatic. Um, And so, we'll go back and I'll say, okay, here you've added this extra panel. I need to adjust this way. But I think, sometimes he also wants silent panels, which I love having silent panels. Sometimes I think, if it doesn't work, then I'll say, can we shift this here?
Mhm.
But sorry, this is very in the weeds.
I love it. That's what if people are listening. That's what I tried to get into, so I like it.
So the two things that I think are really important in humor in comics are the pacing
Mm.
and that yeah, well, okay, let me say this differently. If the thing is the pacing, part of it's the visual pacing,
Mm.
the reaction shots and the pacing of the dialogue itself.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I was obsessed with Mae West. And I remember her that famous line, why don't you come up and see me? My door is always open or whatever. That was the original.
Yeah.
And and I think that the director or the cinematographer was just stopping it there. And she said, "No, you got to pan after me as I sashay up the stairs. Just keep it on my derriere." And so the joke has to have a moment to breathe while you're following, her ample derriere sashaying up the stairs. And I was 13 when I read that, and it stuck in my head that you need, you need to think about what gives the audience or the reader the best laugh.
Yeah. Is it, working with a creator so often as you have now, is it make it easier for you as you are scripting your stories to say, like, what your artist wants?
Yes, yes. And sometimes I do things that I know he's gonna be upset about. So at one point, so here's this 1959, Howl setting. It's mainly Greenwich Village, but I knew that I wanted to have a bit of a showdown outside of the village. Little bit of a spoiler here. I don't think it's a huge one. I wanted it to be in one of those big old Jewish hotels, the Dirty Dancing type hotel. And so I had to think about how everyone was going to get there. And so if I say to you, 1959, you're on the road, what is it you would want to see in terms of, vehicles?
I mean, I'm trying, I'm trying to
Just
think. Classic car, like,
Okay, so classic cars, definitely. You want to have a cool convertible.
yeah.
But what else? We're talking, late 50s, rebels, leather jackets,
Oh,
easy.
some motorcycles.
Yes, you want a motorcycle gang,
Yeah.
right? The minute I said,
Yes.
you're like, of course, you need to have a motorcycle gang.
Absolutely.
And you're dealing with rebels, beatniks, you also need a motorcycle gang. And when I realized that, and this is partially about going back and forth between my story and what
Yeah.
would I want if I were a reader. Would definitely want a 1950s motorcycle gang. And I was just, no, please don't make me do this. But then he got into it.
So good. So, how long is this series? Is it 4 or 5 issues?
It's 5 issues.
Okay.
And yeah, there's so much more I would want to do. But I think this one with Guilt, I felt at the end. Guilt was my previous
Mhm.
series with him about a 70, no, it's 80 something woman and her home healthcare aide on the Upper West Side who go through a time portal and end up together in 1973 as a 30 something woman and an 8-year-old kid. And with that one, toward the end, I was like, oh my God, I need 3 more issues. How am I going to do this? So this time I was prepared and I kept thinking throughout, you know, do not cram 20 issues worth into 5.
Yeah.
I think I paced it all right, but there was so much, I always want to keep going.
So good. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about your comics. Get how it's out now. Is there anything else that you would like to promote? I know you mentioned you got something else coming out in March. You're young.
Yeah, so Mystic U, which is a first year of college for Zatanna and a bunch of the other magical folks in of DC Comics, and it's a really fun series. For me, that one was about going to college after being the best at something in high school and discovering that not only are you not the best, you may be the worst. So that's coming out, and a lot of other things are sort of in the percolating stage.
Okay.
But if people check my website, www.alisakwitney.com, that's Kwitney, I'll be doing more stuff, including a new podcast with Lonnie Diane Rich, my partner that we did an endless podcast for a while. We're going to do one on reading. And the first thing we'll start is with Grady Hendrix's wonderful Witchcraft for Wayward Girls.
Oh, awesome. Excellent. That's so cool to hear. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about comics with me. It's been a joy.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. And you just looking at all the books behind you, I wish I could see everything more clearly. Go by.
There's a lot. So, well, all the links that we talked about will be in the description of this video, or if you're listening on, via podcast, check the links as well. Go look at her website. Let's go support it, and hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.
Thank you.